A discovery in Turkey has forced us to rewrite the story of human civilization. This is Göbekli Tepe, a temple complex built 12,000 years ago, a staggering 6,000 years before Stonehenge. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a single archaeological site is overturning everything we thought we knew about our origins. For generations, the accepted story was clear. First, humans learned to farm and build permanent settlements. Only then, with the security of surplus food, did they have the luxury to develop religion, art, and complex society. Göbekli Tepe turns that sequence completely upside down. Here, in the barren hills of southeastern Turkey, our hunter-gatherer ancestors came together to erect colossal stone pillars, carving them with intricate beasts and mysterious symbols. This was not a village or a town. It was a cathedral built by nomads, a monument to spiritual belief constructed millennia before the plow or the city. We are left with haunting questions. Why did these prehistoric people bury their entire sacred complex under thousands of tons of earth, preserving it like a time capsule? What powerful force could compel scattered bands to cooperate on such a breathtaking scale? The answers challenge our deepest assumptions about what drives human progress. What does it mean for our own society if the first spark of civilization was not practicality, but a shared search for meaning? The plow of a local farmer, striking stone again and again in the 1960s, was the first whisper from beneath the soil. He had no idea his field was a roof. For decades, that was all it was, a curious nuisance to agriculture, a place where the earth seemed strangely hard. Even when archaeologists from Istanbul and Chicago surveyed the region in the 1960s, they noted the unusual mound called Göbekli Tepe. They saw the broken limestone slabs protruding from the dirt and dismissed them as nothing more than a Byzantine cemetery, a medieval footnote. The truth was sleeping just beneath their feet, waiting for the right person to listen. That person was Klaus Schmidt, a German archaeologist with a deep knowledge of the region's prehistoric past. In 1994, reviewing old survey reports, he was struck by the descriptions of the flint scattered across Göbekli Tepe's surface. This was not ordinary stone. It was worked, chipped into tools by human hands, and there was a staggering amount of it. Schmidt later wrote that seeing that carpet of flint was the moment he knew. This was no graveyard from a few centuries ago. This was a site from the dawn of time, a place where prehistoric people had gathered in enormous numbers, shattering stone over millennia. He stood on that hill, looked at the strange, T-shaped pillars mistaken for tombstones, and felt a profound certainty. He was looking at the tops of megaliths, the very first great architecture of humankind. The excavation that began the following year was like peeling back a page of a forgotten book. As they carefully removed the dry soil, the true scale of those pillars began to emerge. They were not just stones, they were giants carved from solid limestone blocks weighing 10, 20, even 50 tons. The team uncovered not one, but several of these colossal pillars arranged in great stone circles. Each discovery was a shock to the historical record. This sophisticated, monumental architecture was not the product of a settled farming society with kings and engineers. Carbon dating confirmed the unthinkable. These circles were erected around 12,000 years ago, a time when textbooks said humans were nomadic hunter-gatherers, living in small bands, following herds, and leaving little behind. Göbekli Tepe stood as a silent, monumental contradiction, a cathedral built by people who supposedly had no reason and no means to build one. What could have possibly compelled them to undertake such a backbreaking collective effort? The sheer age of Göbekli Tepe is its most revolutionary statement. To understand why this site shatters our historical timeline, we need to listen to what the stones themselves are telling us through a scientific process called radiocarbon dating. When the builders erected these massive pillars, they used a kind of mortar to secure them. Trapped within that ancient mortar were tiny fragments of organic material, like charcoal from their fires or even bits of bone. These fragments became time capsules. All living things absorb a radioactive form of carbon from the atmosphere, and when they pass, that carbon begins to decay at a steady, predictable rate. By measuring how much of this carbon remains in these ancient samples, scientists can calculate their age with remarkable precision. The verdict from these silent witnesses was astounding. The oldest stone circles at Göbekli Tepe were raised around 9,600 years before the Common Era. The complex remained in active use for over 1,000 years, with new structures added until about 8,200 BC. Let's place that on a timeline we can grasp. This construction began at the very tail end of the last ice age. The great glaciers were retreating, but the world was still a wild and challenging place. According to every traditional history book, humans at this moment were nomadic hunter-gatherers. They lived in small, mobile bands, their entire existence focused on the daily pursuit of food, following animal migrations and foraging for wild plants. They were not supposed to have permanent architecture. They were not supposed to have organized labor on a grand scale. Yet, here at Göbekli Tepe, they were quarrying 50-ton monoliths, carving them with artistry, and arranging them into precise, symbolic circles. This was happening a staggering 6,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza was even a concept. It predates the invention of the wheel. It is millennia older than the first cities of Mesopotamia, like Uruk, which we long considered the cradle of civilization. It is even older than the widespread practice of farming. This single, undeniable date forces a dramatic rewrite of the human story. The established sequence said farming led to surplus, surplus led to settlements, settlements led to specialization, and specialization finally allowed for complex religion and monumental art. Göbekli Tepe stands that logic on its head. It presents us with a profound new possibility. What if the first spark was not economic but spiritual? What if it was a shared belief, a common ritual that first brought scattered people together and gave them a reason to cooperate on a scale never before seen? The timeline suggests that the temple may not have been the product of a complex society. It may have been the very thing that created one. The scale of the ambition here is almost beyond comprehension. Picture a series of great stone rings, each one a perfect circle carved from the living earth, their diameters stretching from 10 to 30 meters across. Within each ring stand sentinel-like pillars, but the true marvels are the two colossal monoliths placed at the very heart of every enclosure. These are the iconic T-shaped pillars, giants of limestone that soar over 5 meters tall and weigh more than 10 tons each, the weight of several large elephants. They are not crude blocks, their surfaces are smooth, their distinctive T-form is deliberate and repeated, and they are adorned with breathtaking artistry. This was architecture on a monumental scale, executed with precision, yet built by people who, according to our old story, should have been incapable of such a feat. They had no metal chisels, no pulleys, no wheels, and no beasts of burden to pull these stones. So how on earth did they do it? The answer lies in a breathtaking display of coordinated human will. Archaeologists believe the builders quarried these massive pillars directly from the limestone bedrock of the nearby plateau, using nothing but simple stone hammers to painstakingly chip them free. Then came the Herculean task of movement. Without animals or carts, the only engine available was human muscle. We can envision teams of hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of people using wooden levers, ropes woven from plant fibers, and a system of log rollers. They would have inched each titanic pillar across the rough landscape, a journey of several hundred meters that required not just brute strength, but impeccable coordination, communication, and leadership. The final act of raising these monoliths and setting them upright into precisely carved sockets in the bedrock floor would have been the most dangerous and dramatic moment of all, a collective triumph of engineering and trust. This level of organization implies something profound. These were not just random bands of hunters who happened to be passing by. This project required a shared, sacred purpose so powerful it could marshal a vast workforce, feed them, house them temporarily, and direct their labor for seasons, possibly for generations. The symmetry of the circles and the consistent, sophisticated style of the carvings tell us this was not a first attempt. It was the product of a deep, pre-existing tradition, a cultural blueprint passed down and perfected. Göbekli Tepe stands as proof that long before kings or empires, human beings could achieve the impossible, not for conquest or commerce, but for a shared idea that was greater than any one individual. What kind of idea could command such devotion? These silent stone giants are not just holding up a roof, they are the storytellers of Göbekli Tepe. The iconic T-shape is repeated across dozens of pillars, a consistent, deliberate form that speaks a visual language we are still learning to read. Most researchers see in these monoliths not abstract posts, but highly stylized human figures. The broad crossbar of the T represents shoulders and folded arms, while the long, central shaft is a body standing in quiet observation. On some of the pillars, this interpretation moves from theory to certainty, as the stone itself provides the details. Carefully carved reliefs depict hands with fingers resting just below the chest, ornate belts with buckles and hanging loincloths. These are not random decorations, they are the attire and anatomy of a being frozen in time for 12,000 years. So who or what are these stone beings meant to be? The silence they hold is profound, but their prominent, central placement within every sacred circle offers clues. They could represent venerated ancestors, watchful guardians of the ritual space, or perhaps deities of a forgotten pantheon. Their uniformity is as significant as their form. Across all the excavated enclosures, the T-shape remains a constant. This tells us that the people who came to Göbekli Tepe, likely from many different hunter-gatherer groups across the region, shared a common set of symbols and beliefs. They all understood what this shape meant. It was a unifying icon, a piece of shared identity that allowed for cooperation on a massive scale. This represents one of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated systems of symbolic communication, a complex idea conveyed entirely through form and image, millennia before the first written word was etched into clay. We are left to wonder what messages are encoded in their solemn posture. Do they stand in prayer, in authority, or in a state of eternal watchfulness over the rituals performed around them? Their silence is a puzzle, but it is a puzzle that proves a revolutionary point. Long before we wrote stories down, we were already building them in stone. But the pillars themselves are only part of the story. Their surfaces are alive, carved with astonishing skill and care. The limestone is a canvas for a sprawling bestiary, a Stone Age gallery frozen in time. Foxes slink with cunning grace, snakes coil in intricate patterns, scorpions raise their tails in warning, herds of gazelles seem to move across the stone. There are boars, wild ducks, cranes, and fearsome predators like lions, all rendered with a dynamism and anatomical precision that feels shockingly modern. This is not random decoration. Every creature is placed with intention, turning each monolithic figure into a tapestry of symbolic meaning. So what does this menagerie represent? One compelling theory is that these animals served as totems. In a world without written language or national flags, identity was tied to symbols. Each clan or family group that journeyed to Göbekli Tepe might have been represented by a specific animal: the fox clan, the crane people, the scorpion family. The gathering of these symbols on shared pillars would then tell a story of alliance, a visual treaty carved in stone, showing that many different groups came together under a shared spiritual purpose. Another possibility dives into the realm of myth. These carvings could be illustrations of stories and beliefs now lost to time, a visual mythology depicting a spiritual world parallel to our own. The animals might be characters in epic narratives of creation, heroes or tricksters, their interactions on the pillars capturing moments from sacred lore. Some researchers looking at patterns across ancient sites suggest another fascinating layer. Could these animals represent constellations? The fox, the snake, the scorpion, these are all forms we recognize in the night sky. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe were keen observers of the heavens, using the stars to track seasons or mark important dates, then the temple itself might be a map of the cosmos, linking their rituals directly to the movements of the celestial bodies above. Then there is the striking prevalence of dangerous and powerful creatures. Why fill a sacred space with images of scorpions, venomous snakes, and predatory lions? These likely were not symbols of fear but of respect. They may represent potent spiritual forces or deities that needed to be acknowledged and appeased. Alternatively, they could be seen as guardians, protective spirits carved into the very fabric of the temple to ward off evil or to symbolize the formidable power of the beliefs held within. This rich iconography reveals a relationship with the natural world that was deep, complex, and profoundly symbolic. For these hunter-gatherers, animals were not just sources of food or threats to survival. They were integral to a worldview rich with meaning, actors in a grand, interconnected story of life, spirit, and cosmos. The stones of Göbekli Tepe do not just show us what these people saw. They show us how they thought. Yet the greatest mystery of Göbekli Tepe is not how it was built but how it ended. Around 8,000 years before the Common Era, after more than 1,000 years of sacred use, something remarkable happened. The people did not simply walk away, they performed a final, monumental act. They deliberately buried their entire temple, not with a careless collapse of dirt but with a careful, laborious process. Thousands upon thousands of tons of soil, stone chips, and rubble were brought to the hilltop and used to fill the great stone circles, packing them tightly until the towering pillars were completely submerged. This was not an accident of time. It was a conscious choice, a ritual on the same colossal scale as the construction itself. Why would a culture go to such extraordinary lengths to hide its own greatest achievement? One compelling theory sees this not as an ending but as a respectful transition. In many cultures, when a sacred object or space has served its purpose, it is not destroyed. It is ceremonially retired. The careful burial of Göbekli Tepe could have been a form of ritual decommissioning. Perhaps the beliefs associated with the old animal totems and T-shaped gods were evolving. A new spiritual understanding may have been emerging, one that required the powerful symbols of the past to be peacefully laid to rest, hidden from view but not dishonored. The act of filling the enclosures, then, becomes a profound gesture of closure, a way to give the old gods a proper resting place. Other researchers look to more practical motivations. Could the burial have been an act of protection? If the site's spiritual power was seen as too potent or dangerous for a changing world, sealing it away might have been a way to contain that power, to prevent it from affecting the community. Alternatively, it might have been a practical measure to safeguard the sacred carvings from erosion or from being defaced by newer groups with different beliefs. By entombing their temple, the builders ensured its survival, even if its meaning was to be forgotten. This leads to the most haunting possibility of all. What if the burial was intentional preservation? What if it was meant to be a time capsule? The builders, aware of the incredible effort and artistry invested over generations, might have chosen to hide their work not out of fear but out of hope. They could have been sending a message into the future, a curated collection of their world's knowledge and belief, sealed against the ravages of time. While we can never know their true intent, the result is undeniable. This deliberate act transformed Göbekli Tepe from a mere ruin into a sealed archive. It is not a site that crumbled, it is a site that was saved, patiently waiting in the dark for 12,000 years, holding its secrets intact until a farmer's plow and an archaeologist's curiosity finally answered its silent call. This paradox strikes at the very heart of our old assumptions about civilization. How could a society of nomadic hunters, constantly on the move for their next meal, possibly muster the resources to feed the army of workers needed to build such a place? The answer is written in the very soil of Göbekli Tepe, not in grand carvings but in broken fragments. Archaeologists have sifted through mountains of ancient fill and discovered a staggering fact. The single most common find at the site is not stone tools or pottery shards. It is animal bones, tens of thousands of them, a vast, layered record of meals on a truly colossal scale. The bones come from gazelle, from massive wild cattle called aurochs, and from wild sheep. These are not the remains of small family dinners. This is the debris of epic communal feasting, repeated over centuries. The sheer volume tells a story of organized, large-scale hunting and consumption, a logistical feat in itself. So how did they do it without farms or granaries? The most compelling theory paints a picture of a brilliant seasonal rhythm. Göbekli Tepe was likely not a permanent city. Instead, it may have functioned as a sacred destination for cyclical gatherings. Imagine different hunter-gatherer bands scattered across the region, following their own migratory paths for most of the year. But at a specific time, perhaps dictated by a celestial event or a spiritual calendar, these groups would converge on this holy hill. They would arrive not empty-handed but bringing the bounty of their recent hunts. The gathering transformed from a spiritual pilgrimage into a massive, cooperative economic event. The labor to quarry and raise a single 50-ton pillar would have required a huge workforce, but that workforce did not need year-round support. They could be mobilized for intense periods of concerted effort during these seasonal meetings, fueled by the collective food surplus brought by all the attending groups. This changes everything. It shows that economic cooperation and social complexity did not begin with the plow. They began with the shared ritual, the motivation to come together, to pool resources, and to work toward a common, non-utilitarian goal. The construction of a temple created the very conditions we once thought were necessary to build it. The feast was not a reward after the hard work of farming. It was the engine that made the work possible. This suggests that the deepest human bonds, the ones capable of organizing society, may have been forged not around storage silos, but around shared stories and sacred stones under a sky they all believed in. The silence of Göbekli Tepe speaks in what is missing. After decades of meticulous excavation, archaeologists have uncovered a breathtaking ceremonial complex, but they have found almost none of the ordinary traces of daily life. There are no foundations for permanent houses, no central hearths for family cooking, no storage pits for grain, and none of the typical household waste that litters ancient villages. This is not a place where people lived, it is a place where they came to be something more. Göbekli Tepe appears to have been, from its very inception, a pure ceremonial center, a cathedral built in the wilderness, visited by a transient congregation. This realization deepens the mystery profoundly. If thousands of people gathered here to build and to worship, where did they actually call home? The current evidence points to the surrounding landscape. Scattered across the hills and valleys near Göbekli Tepe, researchers have identified smaller, simpler sites. These were likely seasonal camps, temporary bases where the builders and pilgrims lived in huts or tents during their stays at the holy site. They would journey from their distant territories, set up camp for weeks or months, contribute their labor and their offerings, partake in the great communal feasts, and then return to their migratory lives. This physical separation of spaces reveals a sophisticated mental architecture. These early people had already developed a clear conceptual division between the sacred and the profane. The world of daily survival, hunting, cooking, sleeping, was kept distinct from the world of ritual, symbol, and collective identity. The hilltop was reserved exclusively for the latter, a zone set apart by its grandeur and its purpose. This has a revolutionary implication. It means that the very idea of creating a dedicated, monumental space for communal spiritual activity predates the very idea of the village. We have long assumed that permanent architecture began with practical needs: shelter, storage, defense. Göbekli Tepe suggests it may have begun with a spiritual need. The first walls humans built with intention might not have been to keep the weather out, but to define a sacred circle, to create a container for shared belief. This dedicated space did not serve an existing, settled society. Instead, it acted as a social and spiritual magnet, a fixed point in a nomadic world that gave scattered, independent bands a common identity and a reason to cooperate on a scale that would eventually make settled society possible. The temple did not grow from a town. In a profound sense, the town may have grown from the temple. Göbekli Tepe forces a fundamental question: what truly defines the dawn of civilization? For over a century, the answer seemed settled. Historians pointed to the urban revolution of Mesopotamia, a package deal of milestones. True civilization began with the first cities, with the invention of writing to record taxes and laws, and with the mastery of metal to forge tools and weapons. These were tangible, practical achievements born from economic surplus, the logical conclusion of the farming revolution. Göbekli Tepe dismantles this checklist. It presents us with something entirely different, a phenomenon we might call the ritual revolution or the symbolic revolution. Here, 12,000 years ago, we find the core ingredients of a complex culture, but they are assembled for a wholly different purpose. We find monumental architecture not for defense or housing, but for ceremony. We find sophisticated, unified art not for decoration, but for profound symbolic communication. We find evidence of breathtaking social organization, not to manage crops or trade, but to execute a shared spiritual vision. If civilization is, at its heart, the creation of a complex, shared culture that binds people together into something larger than themselves, then its roots are far older and more spiritually profound than we ever imagined. This site suggests that the first great leap of human culture was not a practical response to full stomachs, but a collective response to the human mind itself, to our innate need for myth, for meaning, and for a story that connects us to each other and to the cosmos. The impulse to gather and create something enduring, driven by belief, may have been the original social glue, the catalyst that first taught scattered groups how to cooperate on a scale that would eventually make cities and writing possible. This is a profound shift in understanding our own nature. It places the search for meaning not as a luxury of settled life, but as a primary, driving force in the human story. Perhaps we did not build temples because we became civilized. We became civilized because we first built temples. But among these grand animal symbols, a small human detail speaks volumes. On one of the central T-shaped pillars, carved with care at the point where the stone figure's waist would be, is a clear and unmistakable belt. It is depicted with a distinct buckle or clasp, a functional piece of clothing rendered in lasting stone. In a world we often imagine as primitive and bare, this single feature opens a window into a culture far more nuanced than we supposed. This was created long before the widespread use of woven cloth, meaning this belt was almost certainly fashioned from leather, carefully cut, perhaps decorated, and fitted with a fastener made of bone, wood, or stone. It was not merely functional. Its deliberate inclusion on a sacred monolith tells us it was symbolic. In any society, what we choose to wear, especially during important ceremonies, communicates meaning. This belt could have signified a specific role. Perhaps it marked a shaman or a ritual leader, someone set apart by their knowledge or their connection to the spiritual world. It might denote a rank or a status achieved within the community, a visual sign of respect and authority. Or it could simply be part of a prescribed ceremonial costume, a uniform worn by those participating in the sacred rites performed within the stone circles. This transforms our view of the people behind the pillars. They were not anonymous laborers lost to time. They were individuals with concepts of adornment, identity, and social roles. They understood the power of ritual attire to transform a person, to mark a moment as sacred, and to visually communicate one's place within a shared story. That carved belt is a whisper of personal identity amidst the monumental scale. It reminds us that the builders of Göbekli Tepe had fashion, they had ceremony, and they had a deep understanding that the sacred often requires a deliberate, visible preparation. This small, enduring detail makes the past feel closer, more human, and infinitely more complex. The silent stones might hold a map of the heavens above. Beyond the carvings of animals and ancestors, some researchers see another layer of meaning encoded in the very architecture of Göbekli Tepe, one that points directly to the stars. This field of study, called Archaeoastronomy, examines how ancient cultures understood and integrated celestial events into their monuments and their lives. At this ancient site, the idea is both controversial and captivating. Could these stone circles, built at the very end of the last ice age, function as a sophisticated observatory? Certain analyses of the enclosures suggest the possibility. Some of the central T-shaped pillars appear to be aligned with specific points on the horizon, marking where key stars would have risen or set over 12,000 years ago. One star in particular draws attention, Sirius, the brightest star in our night sky. For many ancient cultures, Sirius held immense importance, often heralding seasonal changes like the flooding of the Nile in Egypt, though that was millennia later. If the builders of Göbekli Tepe were tracking Sirius, it would indicate a profound, long-term observation of the heavens, an ability to predict celestial cycles with remarkable accuracy. The layout of the enclosures themselves might also tell a cosmic story. Rather than being randomly placed, the various circles could be arranged to mirror specific constellations or to create a large-scale diagram of significant celestial relationships on the ground. This transforms the hilltop from a simple ritual space into a kind of sacred clock and calendar, permanently fixed in stone. If this interpretation holds, the implications are staggering. It means these hunter-gatherers possessed not just spiritual fervor, but a highly developed intellectual tradition. They were meticulous scientists of the night sky, tracking the slow wobble of the Earth's axis over centuries, a cycle known as precession, which gradually changes the position of the stars over long spans of time. Their rituals, then, were likely synchronized with these celestial events. A gathering might be timed to a solstice sunrise, a specific lunar phase, or the helical rising of a star like Sirius. This creates a powerful fusion of belief and knowledge, where spiritual ceremony and astronomical observation were two sides of the same coin. The temple becomes a place where the community literally aligned itself with the cosmos, reinforcing the idea that human life was part of a grand, orderly, and meaningful universe. This potential astronomical function reveals an intellectual depth we rarely grant to people of this distant era, suggesting the dawn of civilization was lit not just by fire, but by the careful, reverent study of the stars. The animal carvings may be more than clan symbols or celestial maps. They could be portraits from another world entirely. Some anthropologists studying Göbekli Tepe see its entire design through the lens of a practice found in cultures across the globe and deep into time, shamanism. This interpretation suggests the site was not just a temple for communal worship, but but a specialized center for ritual journeys into altered states of consciousness. In shamanic traditions, a practitioner, often through rhythmic drumming, chanting, or the use of certain plants, enters a trance state. In this state, they are believed to travel to a spirit world to seek guidance, healing, or knowledge for their community. The vivid, often composite animals that appear in such visions are not random. They are powerful spirit guides, protectors, or messengers. Look again at the foxes, snakes, and birds covering the pillars. Could these be the very beings that visiting shamans encountered and then faithfully reproduced in stone, creating a permanent record of their spiritual voyages? The architecture itself supports this idea. The great stone circles are not open-air plazas. They are deeply sunken, enclosed spaces with walls that block out the horizon and the distractions of the everyday world. Once inside, with the sky framed only above, a person would be immersed in a separate reality, surrounded by the carved images of the spirit realm. This womb-like enclosure is ideal for sensory deprivation, focusing the mind inward and making it receptive to visionary experience. The towering T-shaped pillars take on a new role in this context. They are no longer just stylized ancestors. They become conduits or portals. Their strong, vertical form, rooted deep in the earth yet reaching upward, could symbolize the axis connecting the ordinary world with the spirit world, the very path a shaman's consciousness would travel. The gatherings at Göbekli Tepe, then, might have centered on these profound ritual experiences. The community would come together not only to feast and build, but to support and witness these journeys, to receive the knowledge brought back, and to affirm their shared cosmic reality through monumental art. This connects the builders to a fundamental, ancient human impulse, the urge to transcend ordinary reality and commune with a larger, unseen order. It suggests that what unified these early people and inspired their greatest collective effort was a shared spiritual practice, a common need to map the terrain of the sacred and give it a permanent home in the world of stone. This massive collaborative effort was a social revolution in stone. To transform a bare hilltop into a ring of carved giants required more than just strong backs and sharp flint. It demanded a new way of being together. The project itself, the sheer logistics of moving 50-ton pillars across the landscape, may have been the very engine that forged the first complex society. Think about what had to happen. Scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, each perhaps following their own traditions and territories, had to agree on a common goal. They had to coordinate their arrival, pool their food resources for the great feasts, and then organize themselves into specialized teams. Some would have been expert quarry workers, knowing exactly how to chip a monolith from the bedrock without shattering it. Others would have mastered the art of carving, translating shared symbols into precise reliefs on hard limestone. Still others would have emerged as organizers, the prehistoric equivalent of foremen or logisticians, planning the routes for moving the pillars and directing the synchronized pull of hundreds of ropes. New social roles were born from necessity. For perhaps the first time on such a scale, leadership was not just about hunting prowess or familial ties. It was about project management, persuasion, and maintaining a shared vision over months or years of work. This collective endeavor created a powerful new social glue. A shared identity formed not based on bloodline alone, but on participation in this monumental, sacred task. You were no longer just a member of the Fox clan. You were a builder of Göbekli Tepe. This identity came with its own rules and norms: how to cooperate, how to resolve disputes, how to contribute fairly to the communal feast. A subtle hierarchy likely developed based on skill, knowledge, and responsibility rather than mere strength. In this radical view, the temple is not the end product of a settled, complex society. It is the birthplace of one. The traditional story says farming created surplus, which allowed specialization, which then enabled grand projects. Göbekli Tepe suggests we have it backwards. It proposes that the grand project came first. The compelling, non-utilitarian drive to build a sacred space forced scattered people to invent the very skills of large-scale cooperation, planning, and social organization. The act of raising these stones was a training ground, a millennia-long workshop in how to build a civilization. The rituals performed within the finished circles may have celebrated the gods, but the process of building them taught humanity how to work together. Yet among the menagerie of beasts, another language is etched into the stone. Interspersed with the foxes and cranes are curious, abstract shapes. We see what look like the letter H, simple crescents, and fields of small, carefully carved dots arranged in clusters or lines. These are not pictures of anything in the natural world. They are geometric, intentional, and utterly mysterious. While the animal carvings speak a language of myth and clan, these symbols whisper of something else entirely, a move toward pure abstraction, a step into the realm of encoded information. What could these marks mean? One compelling idea is that they are early systems of notation. The networks of dots, for instance, might be a primitive form of counting or record-keeping. Could each dot represent a day, a person, or an animal contributed to a communal feast? They might track lunar cycles, marking the passage of time between sacred gatherings. The H shapes and crescents could be simplified clan symbols, a kind of signature or brand for different groups participating in the construction, a more abstract evolution from the animal totems. Some researchers looking at the patterns propose an even more celestial connection. The clusters of dots do not resemble random scatterings, they are grouped with purpose. Could they represent specific star clusters or constellations, mapping the heavens in a shorthand form on the pillars? This would align with the potential astronomical function of the site, turning these symbols into a permanent, stone-bound chart of the night sky. The true significance of these geometric forms lies not in any single translation we might guess, but in the profound cognitive leap they represent. Creating a picture of a lion requires observation and skill. But creating an H shape or a deliberate pattern of dots requires a different kind of thought. It requires the mind to agree that this arbitrary mark will stand for a specific idea, a number, a group, or a celestial object. This is the birth of symbolic encoding. It is the move from depicting what you see to representing what you know, what you count, or what you believe. While we may never decipher their specific meaning, their presence is a monumental clue. It tells us the builders of Göbekli Tepe were not just artists and laborers. They were thinkers experimenting with the very building blocks of written communication. They were developing a symbolic language capable of conveying concepts that a simple picture could not. Quantities, sequences, affiliations, perhaps even simple narratives. This cognitive step, etched quietly beside the roaring lions, hints at a mental world rich with abstraction, laying the silent, stone foundation for all the record-keeping, mathematics, and literature that would follow millennia later. Göbekli Tepe's grandeur can feel like a solitary beacon in the deep past, but it did not shine in a void. Across the rolling hills of southeastern Anatolia, other sites from the same era whisper of a shared cultural awakening. Places like Nevali Sori and Sayanu, though less famous, tell a parallel story on a more intimate scale. At Nevali Sori, archaeologists uncovered a structure with familiar T-shaped pillars, smaller but unmistakably related in style and symbolism. This was not a grand ceremonial complex, but rather a village shrine, integrated into a settled community that practiced early forms of cultivation. Sayanu reveals a different facet of this era, with its distinctive terrazzo building, a large communal space with a polished lime plaster floor, suggesting gatherings for ritual or decision-making. These sites also show evidence of skilled stoneworking, carved imagery, and specialized areas for communal activities. Together, they paint a picture of a region in ferment, where multiple communities were experimenting with new social and spiritual architectures. This context is crucial. It means Göbekli Tepe was likely not a singular, inexplicable flash of genius. Instead, it appears to have been the crowning achievement, the most ambitious and spectacular manifestation of a cultural movement that was sweeping across the Fertile Crescent. Think of it not as a lone mountain, but as the highest peak in an entire, newly rising mountain range. These contemporary sites shared a common symbolic language and a drive to create permanent, meaningful spaces. What varied was the scale and the focus. Some communities built shrines within their villages. Others, perhaps drawing together the spiritual energy of many such villages, invested their collective might into a dedicated, monumental sanctuary on a holy hill. This network of sites suggests a web of interaction where ideas, artisans, and perhaps even pilgrims moved between communities, sharing techniques and beliefs. Seeing Göbekli Tepe within this wider tapestry transforms it from a bewildering anomaly into a comprehensible, if extraordinary, historical phenomenon. It was part of a Neolithic flowering, a widespread cultural conversation about how to live together and what to believe in, where different communities were all asking the same profound questions and expressing the answers in stone. Just a few hundred meters from the finished stone circles lies the very source of the pillars, the limestone quarry that fed the sacred hill. This is where the story begins in its most raw, physical form. Here, embedded in the living rock of the plateau, archaeologists made a discovery that makes the entire endeavor feel startlingly immediate. It is an unfinished pillar, a sleeping giant still attached to the bedrock it was being born from. This monolithic ghost, measuring nearly 7 meters long, is a colossus in waiting, larger than any of the pillars that were actually raised at the site. Its silent presence speaks volumes. First, it tells us the builders' ambitions were not static. They were growing. Having mastered the technique of quarrying and moving 10-ton monoliths, they set their sights on something even more awe-inspiring. This unfinished block represents a leap in scale, a dream of a pillar that would have dwarfed all the others, perhaps destined for a grander circle never built. Its abandoned state provides a unique, frozen snapshot of the extraction process. You can clearly see the deep channels that workers painstakingly chipped around its outline, using simple stone hammers to isolate it from the earth. It is a direct tutorial in prehistoric engineering, showing the method step by step, halted in time. So why was it left behind? The reasons are a quiet mystery. Perhaps the project was interrupted by a social shift or an environmental change. Maybe the stone itself developed a hidden flaw, a crack that made it too risky to move. Or, more intriguingly, perhaps the plans for the temple complex simply evolved. The spiritual needs of the community may have changed over generations, and the vision for this particular giant was set aside. This single stone, more than any finished pillar, makes the labor visceral. It connects us directly to the stoneworkers, to the sound of countless hammerstones striking rock, to the dust and the effort. It proves this was not a single project with a fixed blueprint, but a living tradition that spanned lifetimes. The quarry is not just a source of stone. It is a museum of ambition, holding a monument to what might have been, a tangible link to the moment when a collective dream was still being carved from the earth. Perhaps the most profound question Göbekli Tepe raises is not about the past it reveals, but about the future it created. What happened next? For generations, the accepted story was a simple chain of cause and effect. Humans learned to farm, which created food surplus, which allowed people to settle down, which then gave them the free time to develop art, religion, and complex society. But what if that chain is backwards? What if the spiritual gathering came first, and the farming was invented to support it? This is the revolutionary idea proposed by Klaus Schmidt and others. They looked at the evidence of massive, sustained feasting at Göbekli Tepe and saw not just a consequence but a catalyst. Feeding hundreds or thousands of people gathered for seasonal rituals was a monumental logistical challenge. Relying solely on hunting wild game was risky and unpredictable. The solution, they suggest, may have been growing right under their feet. The hills surrounding Göbekli Tepe are part of the natural habitat for wild ancestors of modern cereals like einkorn wheat and barley. The theory goes like this: to ensure a reliable food supply for these sacred gatherings, the communities began to deliberately manage these wild plants. They might have cleared fields to encourage their growth, protected them from animals, and begun to selectively harvest and store the grains. Over generations of this practice, the plants themselves began to change, evolving into the domesticated forms we know today. In this scenario, agriculture was not a brilliant discovery that led to leisure and temples. It was a practical innovation born from a sacred necessity. The temple did not emerge from a farming village. The farming village may have emerged to supply the temple. This turns our understanding of human progress inside out. It suggests that the first seeds of civilization were not sown by a solitary farmer in a field, but by a community gathered in a stone circle, their shared belief creating a demand so great it forced a new relationship with the land itself. The ritual feast, then, becomes the engine of the Neolithic revolution. The need to feed the congregation drove the experimentation and cooperation that led to cultivation. If this hypothesis is correct, it means our entire agricultural way of life, the foundation of every modern society, may have its roots not in a struggle for survival, but in a collective search for meaning. The first farms, then, were not just sources of food. They were the logistical support for humanity's earliest cathedrals. The stones of Göbekli Tepe hold more than just carvings. They hold echoes. Recent investigations have uncovered a hidden dimension of this ancient sanctuary, one that appeals not to the eyes but to the ears. The very architecture of the sunken stone circles appears to have been designed with sound in mind. Imagine standing within one of these enclosures, surrounded by towering limestone pillars and smooth, curving walls. The space is a perfect contained chamber, a giant stone bowl carved from the earth. In such an environment, sound does not simply travel, it transforms. A single voice, a rhythmic drumbeat, or the low tone of a horn would not fade away quickly. Instead, it would reverberate, bouncing off the hard surfaces, creating a lingering echo that fills the entire space with a palpable, physical presence. This was not an accidental byproduct of the design. It was likely an intentional feature, a built-in technology for ritual. The builders may have selected and placed these stones not only for their visual symbolism, but for their acoustic properties. Certain types of limestone can resonate in specific ways, and the circular layout would naturally focus and amplify sound toward the center of the enclosure, where the great T-shaped pillars stand. This transforms our understanding of the ceremonies that took place here. They were not silent, solemn affairs. They were likely immersive, overwhelming sensory experiences. The combination of rhythmic sound within that echoing chamber could have profound psychological effects. Sustained drumming or chanting, amplified and reflected by the stones, is known in many cultures to help induce altered states of consciousness, to focus the mind, and to create a powerful sense of group unity. The very vibrations in the air would have been felt in the chest, a physical component of the spiritual journey. This acoustic layer suggests the builders were masters of multi-sensory design. They understood how to manipulate an environment to produce a specific emotional and psychological impact on the participants. The ritual was not just something to be seen and believed. It was something to be heard, felt, and absorbed through the entire body. The goal was likely to dissolve the boundary between the individual and the collective, between the earthly and the divine, using every tool available: stone, symbol, and sound. This turns the enclosures from silent monuments into instruments themselves, giant lithic devices played by the human voice and heartbeat, designed to tune the consciousness of an entire community to a single, sacred frequency. The very fame that brought Göbekli Tepe back to life now presents its greatest modern challenge. After sleeping in peace for 10,000 years, the ancient stones are now exposed to a new world, one of sunlight, weather, and the footsteps of thousands of visitors. Protecting this fragile legacy has become a delicate, urgent science. The site is no longer just an archaeological dig. It is a major destination, a place where the wonder of discovery must be carefully balanced with the hard realities of preservation. The first and most visible shield is the series of large protective shelters that now arch over the main excavated enclosures. These are not mere roofs. They are carefully engineered climate buffers designed to protect the delicate limestone carvings from direct rainfall, harsh sun, and the freeze-thaw cycles that can slowly fracture stone over time. Their design allows for airflow while managing temperature and humidity, creating a more stable microclimate for the ancient pillars, but the work of conservation never stops. Teams of specialists engage in constant meticulous monitoring. They use advanced imaging to track the slightest crack or erosion. They analyze the soil and stone for salt crystallization or biological growth. Every visitor path is planned to minimize vibration and wear. This is a race against time and the inevitable impact of human curiosity, a responsibility felt deeply by those who care for the site. We are, after all, the first generation in over 100 centuries to look upon these carvings. Our privilege carries a profound duty. The story of Göbekli Tepe is no longer just a tale from the deep past. It is also a living lesson in contemporary stewardship, a reminder that to unlock a mystery is to also accept the charge of its care, ensuring this irreplaceable window into our shared dawn remains clear for all the generations yet to come. Among the roaring lions and slithering snakes, the human form is a ghost, while the animal kingdom is celebrated in vivid, abundant detail across the pillars of Göbekli Tepe. Realistic depictions of people are astonishingly rare. This absence is not an accident of preservation. It is a deliberate, meaningful silence. When a human figure does appear, it is not a portrait of an individual, but a symbol laden with ritual significance. One of the most discussed is a small limestone statue found in the fill, often called the shaman figure. It shows a person seated, with arms folded across the chest in a pose of contemplation or authority, the face worn but serene. This is not a casual carving. Its careful execution and its discovery amidst the sacred debris suggest it represented a specific, important role within the ritual life of the community, perhaps a mediator between the human and spirit worlds. Far more haunting is a relief carved directly onto a pillar. It shows a headless human body, arms outstretched, with a large vulture perched ominously nearby. This stark image has sparked intense debate. To our modern eyes, it evokes ideas of a ceremonial practice, a powerful act of offering or transition, yet we must be cautious. Interpreting this through our own cultural lens risks misunderstanding. In the belief system of the builders, this may not have represented a moment of hardship, but one of transformation. The vulture, a creature that consumes the physical form, was seen in many later Neolithic cultures not as a symbol of death, but as a purifying agent, a being that carried the spirit skyward. The headless figure could represent an ancestor in a state of ritual passage, their individual identity released as they joined the realm of the venerated dead, becoming part of the collective spiritual force that watched over the living. This profound scarcity of human imagery speaks volumes about their worldview. It suggests there may have been a cultural reluctance to depict individual people realistically, perhaps because human identity was understood differently. The individual self might have been seen as temporary, while the enduring symbols, the clan totems, the ancestral pillars, the celestial maps, were eternal. In a stunning way, the most common human representation at Göbekli Tepe is not a carving of a face, but the towering T-shaped pillars themselves. These abstract, powerful forms with their hinted arms and belts may be how the community chose to depict the human essence, not as fragile individuals, but as eternal, stylized guardians, merged with the animal spirits and geometric codes into a single, monumental architecture of belief. Humanity's place, then, was not as the subject of the art, but as an integral, supporting column within a much larger, sacred design. The allure of a mystery this profound inevitably invites speculation. In the decades since its discovery, Göbekli Tepe has become a canvas for many bold theories, from suggestions it marks the location of the biblical Garden of Eden to claims it is the work of a lost, technologically advanced civilization, perhaps even built with otherworldly guidance. While these ideas capture the imagination, they share a common, subtle flaw. They unintentionally diminish the people who actually built it. Mainstream archaeology respectfully sets these narratives aside, not out of closed-mindedness, but because the evidence on the ground tells a more human and ultimately more revolutionary story. The tools found at the site are made of flint and limestone, not an unknown metal. The carvings show animals from the local ecosystem, not extraterrestrial beings. The construction methods, while breathtaking in scale, rely on levers, ropes, and coordinated labor technologies well within the grasp of intelligent, organized hunter-gatherers. Proposing an outside, advanced force as the architect essentially says our own ancestors were incapable of such genius. Yet every stone, every carving, every bone fragment testifies to their profound capability. The real wonder of Göbekli Tepe is not that it was built by gods or aliens, but that it was built by us at a time we never thought possible. This evidence-based understanding is far more transformative than any fringe theory. It forces a monumental shift in our perception of human potential. It reveals that the leap to complex culture did not require a deus ex machina, a forgotten super-civilization, or even the security of farming. It emerged from the collective will, spiritual yearning, and social ingenuity of ordinary people facing an extraordinary idea. By letting go of the fantastical, we can fully embrace the awe of the factual, that 12,000 years ago, without blueprints from elsewhere, humanity gathered on a hill and decided to build a new world, one stone at a time. The true genius of Göbekli Tepe might not be locked within a single stone circle, but in the silent conversation between them, spread across the ancient mound. Archaeologists have identified at least 20 distinct enclosures, though only a handful have been fully excavated. This raises a profound architectural question. Were these circles built one by one as needed over the centuries, or was there, from the very beginning, a grand design for the entire hilltop? The arrangement of these structures is not random. They cluster in specific areas, with older, deeper circles often found in the center of the mound and later ones built toward the edges. This suggests a deliberate, evolving sacred geography. Some researchers analyzing the spatial patterns propose that the enclosures were not independent shrines, but parts of an interconnected ritual landscape. Imagine walking up this holy hill 12,000 years ago. Your journey would not have been to a single building, but through a planned sequence of spaces. Perhaps you entered a smaller, outer enclosure for purification or preparation. Then you moved inward and downward, descending into the older, more central circles for the most profound ceremonies. Each space, with its unique set of carvings and pillar arrangements, could have represented a different stage in a spiritual narrative or a different layer of the cosmos. The layout itself becomes a map. One compelling theory is that different circles were dedicated to the different clans or animal totems whose symbols adorn the pillars. The fox enclosure, the crane enclosure, the serpent enclosure, each serving as a ritual home for that group within the greater collective. Alternatively, the entire complex might reflect a celestial blueprint. The positions of the circles could mirror star patterns significant to the builders, or mark solar and lunar alignments across the horizon, turning the entire hill into a giant, three-dimensional calendar and observatory. This transforms our understanding of the builder's vision. They were not just constructing individual temples, they were engineering an entire ritual environment, a sacred machine built over generations where every placement was meaningful. The hill of Göbekli Tepe, therefore, may be a single, colossal artifact, a physical model of a spiritual universe, designed to guide the community through a landscape of belief as tangible as the stone beneath their feet. His name is forever etched into the very earth of this place. Klaus Schmidt was not the first to walk the hill of Göbekli Tepe, but he was the first to truly see it. A German archaeologist with a deep passion for the prehistory of the Near East, Schmidt arrived at the site in 1994, his curiosity sparked by old survey reports. Standing there, looking at the strange, weathered limestone slabs poking from the soil, he felt an immediate and powerful conviction. This was not a medieval graveyard, as others had assumed. He later wrote of that moment, saying he knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that he was standing atop the world's oldest temple. That intuition became the driving force of the next 2 decades of his life. From 1995, he led the meticulous excavations, season after season, carefully peeling back the millennia of soil to reveal the staggering stone circles. He championed a radical interpretation, calling Göbekli Tepe a cathedral on a hill, a mountain sanctuary built by hunter-gatherers. This was a direct challenge to the established narrative of human progress, and it initially met with significant skepticism from parts of the academic community. How could nomads build such a thing? Schmidt, armed with growing evidence and unwavering belief, persevered. He argued that the site represented a sanctuary-first model of civilization, where the spiritual gathering preceded and even catalyzed settled life. His vision was both grand and precise. He saw the T-shaped pillars as stylized human beings, perhaps ancestors or gods, watching over the rituals. He understood the animal carvings as a complex symbolic language, a unification of different clan totems under a shared sacred purpose. Schmidt's legacy is measured not just in the tons of earth moved or the pillars uncovered, but in the paradigm shift he helped engineer. He gave us a new lens through which to view our own origins, one where the human need for meaning and community is the primary engine of cultural change. His sudden passing in 2014 was a profound loss, but his work had already irrevocably changed the story. Today, when we look at the majestic stones of Göbekli Tepe, we are seeing them through the eyes of the man who believed in them first, who listened to their silent story and dedicated his life to ensuring the whole world could finally hear it. The silent stones of the great sanctuary present a practical puzzle. If thousands gathered here, where did they lay their heads at night? The search for the builders' homes has become one of the most active quests in understanding Göbekli Tepe, sending archaeologists fanning out across the surrounding Jurmush mountains. They are not looking for another grand temple, but for the subtle, fleeting traces of everyday life that supported it. These would be the seasonal camps, the activity areas, the places where people cooked, slept, and prepared for their sacred work on the hill. Finding this missing city is crucial because it would reveal the practical engine of the entire operation. How did a population not rooted to one spot manage to feed and house a workforce large enough to move 50-ton pillars, not just once but for over 1,000 years? The answer likely lies in a distributed model of society. Imagine the landscape not as empty but as a network. Scattered bands of hunter-gatherers, each with their own territory, would have lived in temporary camps, perhaps near reliable water sources or rich hunting grounds along the rivers. For most of the year, these groups lived independently, following the rhythms of the wild, but at appointed times, likely tied to celestial events or spiritual calendars, they would converge on the holy hill, bringing with them the surplus from their territories. The settlement that supported Göbekli Tepe, then, was not a single village. It was the entire region connected by shared belief and a common destination. Recent surveys have begun to detect hints of this network. Researchers have identified smaller, less monumental sites in the area with evidence of tool making and food processing, possible way stations or base camps. The goal is to find clear evidence of temporary structures, post halls for huts, distinct hearth patterns, or middens of domestic waste that can be definitively linked to the same time period as the temple's use. Each potential camp discovered is a piece of the socio-economic map, showing how far people traveled and how they organized their lives around this central, sacred purpose. Solving this mystery would complete our picture of a revolutionary social experiment, showing how mobile people built a permanent spiritual anchor, weaving a society not from streets and houses, but from seasonal journeys toward a shared, monumental dream. Göbekli Tepe has stepped out of the dirt and into our dreams. Its journey from a remote Turkish hilltop to a fixture of global culture is a modern phenomenon. You can now encounter its enigmatic pillars not just in archaeology papers, but in best-selling novels, acclaimed documentaries, and blockbuster video games, where it often stands as the ultimate ancient mystery, a place of lost knowledge and cosmic secrets. This cultural embrace tells us less about the Stone Age builders and more about ourselves. Why does this site, above so many others, capture our collective imagination so powerfully? It represents a tangible reset button on human history. For centuries, the story of civilization felt settled, a linear progression from simple to complex. Göbekli Tepe shattered that timeline, introducing a glorious question mark into our very origins. It is a puzzle with no definitive answer key, and that openness is irresistible. It invites everyone, the writer, the game designer, the viewer at home, to become a speculator, to project their own theories and narratives onto its silent stones. This popular engagement is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it has brought unprecedented awareness and public interest, which translates into vital support for ongoing research and preservation. More people than ever are fascinated by humanity's deep past because of this one site. On the other hand, the leap into myth-making carries the risk of oversimplification. The nuanced, evidence-based story of social and spiritual evolution can be flattened into tales of ancient astronauts or cataclysmic lost empires, narratives that, while entertaining, can overshadow the more profound human truth. The site's cultural footprint shows how a scientific discovery can evolve into a modern legend. It has become an icon for a powerful and thrilling idea. That history is not a closed book written by experts, but a living, breathing field of discovery where each new find can rewrite everything we thought we knew. Göbekli Tepe, in the end, mirrors our own timeless fascination with beginnings, with the unknown, and with the humbling possibility that our story is far stranger and more wonderful than we ever supposed. The hill still holds its deepest secrets close. After decades of work, we have only scratched the surface of Göbekli Tepe, with perhaps less than 10% of the entire mound carefully excavated. The story we have so far is breathtaking, but it is only the opening chapter. What lies beneath the untouched soil promises to be the next great act in this archaeological saga. Using ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive technologies, scientists have mapped the hill and received a startling answer. The scans reveal clear, geometric anomalies buried deep within the earth, the unmistakable signatures of many more stone circles, perhaps another 20 or more, waiting silently in the dark. This means the sprawling complex we marvel at today may be just a small cluster on the edge of a much larger, grander sacred city. The potential locked in those unexcavated enclosures is immense. Will we find new, never-before-seen styles of carving? Could there be pillars depicting entirely different animals, or perhaps a new form of the iconic T-shape that changes our interpretation of its meaning. The most tantalizing possibility is that beneath the oldest circles we know, there may be even older ones, pushing the origins of this ritual tradition back further into the mist of the last ice age. Each new enclosure is a time capsule, a sealed room from the Neolithic world that could contain artifacts preserved in situ, ritual objects, offerings, or tools left exactly where they were placed 12,000 years ago. The future of discovery here is not just about finding more stones. It is about reading the finer print of this ancient society. Meticulous sifting of soil samples, a science called archaeobotany, is analyzing microscopic plant remains. This can reveal not just what they ate at their feasts, but what plants grew in the area, whether they were beginning to cultivate them, and how the environment changed over the centuries of the site's use. The thousands of animal bone fragments are a library of information. Advanced genetic analysis can trace the DNA of these wild herds, telling us where they came from, how they were related, and offering indirect clues about the human populations who hunted them. Even the chemistry of the bones and the residues on stone tools can reveal details about the health of the individuals, their movements across the landscape, and the precise methods they used to prepare food and materials. Every new season of excavation, every new technological application, is a key turning in a lock. The next groundbreaking find might be a small, carved object that explains the geometric symbols, or a new arrangement of pillars that confirms an astronomical alignment. The promise of Göbekli Tepe is that it is not a solved puzzle. It is an active conversation with the past, one where each new answer deepens the mystery and refines our awe. The greatest revelation may still be buried, waiting to remind us once more that our story is always more profound, more intricate, and more human than we ever dared to believe. Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent, stone testament to a profound truth. The human desire to create meaning, to gather in shared belief, and to express ourselves through monumental art is ancient, powerful, and perhaps foundational. This hilltop sanctuary does not merely add a chapter to our history. It compels us to rewrite the entire book's introduction. For generations, we told ourselves a tidy story of human advancement, a logical sequence where survival needs came first. Food, shelter, security, these were the practical foundations upon which the lofty towers of culture, religion, and art were later built. Göbekli Tepe turns that narrative inside out. Here, the lofty towers came first, literally carved from the bedrock by people who supposedly lacked the foundation. It suggests that the spark of civilization was not a practical calculation, but a spiritual and social one. The need to belong to something larger, to tell a common story, and to mark that story in the landscape with breathtaking permanence may have been the original catalyst. This gathering of belief did not follow economic surplus. It created the conditions for it, forcing new levels of cooperation, planning, and innovation just to sustain the ritual itself. In this light, spirituality and social complexity were not the luxurious results of settled life. They were the very engines that made settled life conceivable. When we look at these massive pillars, we are not just examining ancient ruins. We are confronting a mirror, the same drives that brought those hunter-gatherers together, the yearning for connection, the impulse to create beauty, the need to answer life's big questions with shared symbols, are woven into the fabric of what makes us human today. Our modern cathedrals, our concert halls, our sprawling online communities, all echo that primordial urge to build something together that speaks to who we are and what we value. The story of our origins, as told by this wind-swept hill in Turkey, is infinitely richer and more mysterious than we ever imagined. It is a story where the heart and the mind, belief and innovation, were partners from the very beginning. If this journey into humanity's deep past has intrigued you, consider subscribing for more explorations into history's greatest puzzles. We would love to hear your thoughts on what Göbekli Tepe's enduring mysteries mean to you in the comments below.